I will not likely make a habit of coming to the defense of United States Counselor to the President, Kellyanne Conway. Give me a minute. But when she was derided in the media this week for her mention of the Bowling Green massacre, I was carried back on that river of memory to when I was in Bowling Green, Kentucky. I started college there in 1974, and I feel that it's not entirely fair to say that there was not a Bowling Green massacre. That fall was the first time in my life that I was allowed to escape from my too tiny Kentucky hometown, where the zip code is still EIEIO. There at Western Kentucky University, I met and fell madly in love with the most exotic and German international student. We'll call her Gloria, because her name's Gloria. The Bowling Green massacre occurred a few months later when Gloria abruptly broke up with me and soon thereafter married our Sunday school teacher, David. Now, some of you will be thinking that this unfortunate teenage broken heart episode does not rise to the nomenclature of massacre. And I can only say to you, you weren't there. The wound found some balm years later when Gloria divorced David to marry her girlfriend. The existential angst created by the obsessive question, why didn't Gloria love me, became much less pointed when I realized that she didn't love any men. And then it was no longer personal. It was just sort of categorical. But perhaps I should add at this point that Kellyanne Conway is still nuts. Now, more than 40 years later, I find myself on the eve of another Valentine's Day just as single as I was in that fall of 1974. Now, I've been married, but for the past 20 years, I've been single, and I've had a couple of close brushes with the prospect of trying it again. I mean, I haven't bought jewelry, but I've come close. Samuel Johnson once observed on the occasion of the remarriage of a friend of his who had been widowed that to marry a second time is the sign of triumph of hope over experience. I've come close, but my memory has not been entirely anesthetized, and so I've not quite made it to the altar. Like many others, I have more than once foolishly tried to avoid the stigma of being alone on Valentine's Day by trying to cobble together a last-minute and ill-conceived dinner date, but I'm not doing that this year. To save local singles from this fate, Mother's Brewing Company is offering a deal where, for the price of admission, you can spend Valentine's Day at the brewery drinking as much as you can hold, and then they send you home in an Uber. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to be there. I'm just saying that it's none of your business if I am. Last week, I was talking about the rapid evolution of our social connections through the various technologies and social platforms of modern life. But the ancient institution of romance has changed perhaps more than any other of things that, we had a couple visiting us here last week that some of our internet audience from way northern Iowa, just an isolated Iowa farmer who had met his wife on eHarmony. And it's like, that's the kind of thing as the guy that does weddings, I've had people lie to me about that stuff for years. They would meet on an internet dating site and they would say they met at Barnes & Noble. And I know those people. They don't read. They're not at Barnes & Noble. They just agreed from their dating site that they were going to meet there. But I'm glad to see that it is occasionally working for some people. However, I've spent the last 25 years of my life advocating for the rights of gay people, particularly for them to be able to be legally married. And once we cross that Rubicon to the point where they can, it appears that fewer and fewer people are interested in getting married anyway. There's a rapid decline in the rate of marriage in our country. Now, fewer than 50% of Americans are married. It was once considered to be nearly the compulsory goal of adult life. Now, people are shrugging their shoulders about it. When our society was largely agrarian, life expectancy was considerably shorter, marriage and having children was simply a part of the formula of survival. As our population has become more urban, and with the advent of at least more fair compensation and career options for women, it's not equal yet, but it's at least more fair, and with the arrival of reliable birth control, marriage is no longer considered to be crucial for women. In fact, as Gloria Steinem said several years ago, a woman without a man is like a fish without a bicycle. Being married or even being in a couple is no longer an economic necessity, and it isn't even necessary to have and raise children. Now that being in a long-term committed relationship is not crucial, to enter into a romantic partnership is now a matter of elective choice. And more people are choosing, when they are going to take a weekend for Netflix and chill, they are actually watching a movie and relaxing. I mean, they're choosing to live alone. The famous author and psychiatrist M. Scott Peck once said that without the initial lust of sexual attraction, that no couple would ever be able to give up enough of their freedom to get married. But in the absence of the moral strictures that once tightly governed intimacy, couples now have to find a larger reason to stay together. Of course, we would like to think that reason is true love. And I'm probably going to get my email box filled up by saying this, but I don't think true love is enough. I think you can really love someone that you can't live with. I think that something more is needed. I think that coupling in our age calls for a depth of meaning, a partnership that makes 1 and 1 add up to something more than 2. And a lot of short-term relationships, 1 and 1 doesn't even add up to 2. It adds up to 1 1/4 or something. Springfield's own Brad Pitt has now divorced 2 of the most beautiful women the world has ever known. Clearly, mere attraction is temporary, even in the most extreme examples. In any relationship, the cute little curiosities that first attracted you to your partner become annoying. And after a couple of decades, those same eccentricities can become reason for justifiable homicide. My favorite joke about the rabbi, the priest, and the minister goes like this. They met, and let's say it's in a bar, because they're always in a bar. I don't know why they're always going in a bar. But they were arguing about when life begins. And the priest was adamant that life begins at conception. And the minister, who was a more progressive chap, was saying, no. Life begins when the baby can survive, is viable outside of the womb. And neither one could move the other's opinion. So they turned to the rabbi and say, well, what do you think? And he says, you're both wrong. Life begins when the kids are out of college and the dog dies. Of course, my kid is out of college and I don't have a dog. And in a lot of ways, you can say that I do live a very enviable life. I don't have anyone who's dependent on me to either provide them a home or medical care. I don't have to ask anyone's permission or consent when I want to go on vacation. I don't even have to ask someone's permission for what I'm going to have for dinner. And I do have a few very close friends with whom I can go scuba diving more regularly, just out to hear a live band or take in a movie. But I always remember the first time I got to visit the British Museum in London. And the British Museum is a tribute to that incredible period of archaeology when British scholars traveled all over the world and stole everything they saw. The wonders of Egypt and Greece and Rome and the Middle East are all housed under one roof in London, where the British government continues to turn a deaf ear to the nations that demand that their treasures be returned to them. I've made it a point still to go look at all of these stolen goods every time I have the good fortune to be in London. But I'll tell you that standing in front of the Ishtar Gate, standing in front of the Rosetta Stone, the open manuscript of Handel's Messiah in his handwriting, when you can't turn to someone next to you and say, can you believe that? Would you look at that? the experience is kind of hollow. It's not what you would want it to be. I'm okay alone. I'm a pretty good cook, as you can see. I can do my own laundry. I can pay my own bills. I have a lot of freedom. But I'd be lying if I did not acknowledge that there is a certain existential void when you do not have a significant other with whom to share the triumphs and wonders of living. Still, being alone is a lot better than wishing that you were alone. I understand that. The ancient witness from the 21st chapter of Proverbs says, "It is better to live on the corner of a roof than to dwell in a mansion with a contentious and angry woman." I've often thought that if there is a contentious and angry woman in the room, she will give me her phone number before I make it to the exit. That appears to be almost an account of my dating experience. But of course, there's the more modern proverb quoted by women that says, "The more I know about men, the better I like my dog." I titled this sermon "A Perspective on Romance from a Non-Combatant" because after more than 20 years as a single guy, I view romance from a fairly philosophical vantage point. I spend part of every week serving food to the women and children who live in our local domestic violence shelter. And after a career full of pastoral counseling with couples whose marriage had become toxic, I know how sick a love relationship can become. But I also know that there is not a straight line from the altar where two people have pledged to love and respect one another for the rest of their lives to the night when they have to call the police to come and break up the fight. There are what I call the 5 horsemen of the marriage apocalypse. Economic stress can kill a marriage. Differences of opinion about child rearing can make a relationship become toxic. And of course, there's drug and alcohol abuse or the related obsessive behaviors of smoking, gambling, hoarding, or compulsive shopping. There's infidelity and there is physical violence. I've often said to couples in marriage counseling that if you can't name one of these 5, you don't really have any reason to be here. I think all other problems are solvable. And I've had more than my fair share of those kinds of cases in the pastor's study through the years. But I have to admit that those 5 obvious ones are not the only forms of poison that marriages can take. There are more subtle things that end up in a lawyer's office. The more quiet and insidious assassins can be simply taking one another for granted. You can starve a love relationship with neglect. You can steal the oxygen out of your home by giving the time and emotional energy that belongs to your significant other and give it to work or your hobbies or all of those things that put distance between ourselves and our loved ones. These don't happen all at once, but you shouldn't pretend that you don't know what path you are following when you are going in that direction. You don't just wake up one day and find yourself on the East Coast. You had to drive and drive and drive in the same direction. You had to invest yourself, your time, your energy, constantly going east and leaving your family behind. You cannot just say, "We grew apart." When you stopped for gas and got back in your car and kept going east, you knew you were putting distance between you and your family. Look, you don't have to be in a couple anymore. In fact, I don't even think divorce has to be all that bad. It's just that staying with the same person for a long time, that can be really good. Now, you can be happy and lead a meaningful life as a single person, but I don't think that's anybody's first choice. I mean, over half of us are doing it now, but I don't think that was anybody's first choice. If you are fortunate enough to share space with someone who is willing to put up with your crap, then you ought to at least work as hard as they are to try to invest in that relationship the things that you know good and well will feed the relationship, and to avoid putting the kind of poisons into it that you know will kill it. You are not the victim of random events in your life, Your life is the sum total of your choices. So I'm going to leave you with the sage advice of my favorite Langston Hughes poem. Folks, I'm telling you, birthing is hard, dying is mean, so you better get yourselves some loving in between.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.